You know, when I first discovered the Danganronpa games, I dismissed it. I thought it was just going to be an Ace Attorney ripoff that would never be as good. Later, I ended up trying and boy was I wrong. The Danganronpa games bring in experience like no other game has. The closest thing I can think of is, again, Ace Attorney, but even then, it's very different. I'd say Danganronpa has made me feel more like a detective than any other game has. Because it's so different, I'll have to explain it to you. Spoilers for the first chapter of Danganronpa 1 and 2, and the demo for V3. We're also only going to be talking about mainline stuff here, no spin-offs. We're also only talking about the main story. You know, the good part of the game, not the side modes. Some people complain about visual novels not being real games, but instead just books on a big screen. I probably would have said something like this a few years ago. If it wasn't a big game with a lot of action, I probably didn't like it. But now I've opened up to a lot more games, and I like to try different things and appreciate games for what they are instead of focusing on what they aren't. I can confidently say that Danganronpa is not just a real video game, but the most successful video game in terms of giving me an immersive detective experience. This couldn't just be a book. It needed to be a video game to create the detective experience that everyone loved from Danganronpa. A chapter of Danganronpa starts out with a bunch of students just talking before the antagonist Monokuma shows up to give them a motive to kill each other. Starting with this immediately gets the player hooked as they try to think of who will be affected by the motive. Then the game lets you explore the school and hang out with other students in a mode called free time. The game does let you skip free time, but it doesn't recommend it, and I wouldn't recommend it either. Choosing to hang out with other characters helps you get attached to them and makes it even more sad when they die. Hanging out with these characters also helps you get new skills or gives you currency to buy new skills, making the trials easier. So both gameplay wise and story wise, the game does a good job at giving you a reason to not skip free time. Also, the gift you give actually matters. If you give them a gift they don't like, you won't be able to get a skill. So the game encourages you to actually think about what you give them, and also encourages you to spend your mono coins and actually get a good gift. After spending some time with other people and exploring new parts of the school, you'll find something that triggers the intense part of the story. One of your classmates' dead bodies. This immediately gets the player hooked in the game, as it could have been a character they liked, making them sad, or a character they hated, making them happy. Either way, the murders are very exciting. Then we have the investigation part. You get a little more interaction here. You'll find evidence, not just at the crime scene, but in other places too, like their room. You'll have to find evidence in the school. You can click on something and you'll learn about it, with other characters trying to help you figure out where certain things are. If it's important, you'll be given a truth bullet which will be used in the trial. Clicking on an object to discover evidence might seem simple, but it is crucial for the experience. It makes you feel like it's actually you doing the investigation and not just the game holding your hand and telling you a bedtime story. Like if it was a book, it would just list off all the important things. Doing the investigation myself makes me start thinking about who the killer could be before the trial even starts. For example, if the victim was in a different room, and the character mentions someone else being in that room, I might start being suspicious of that character who was in that room. Trigger Happy Havoc has purple words in the dialogue, which you can select and react to, which makes it feel more like you're actually talking to that person. The game lets you scan for every clickable object, and won't let you leave until you found everything important. However, they don't tell you exactly what you missed, and there's many irrelevant things at the crime scene as well. So it does a good job at making sure you don't miss anything, without holding your hand too much. Also, the music really helps sell the detective experience. After you found all the clues, the class trial begins, where all the classmates argue to find the culprit. This is definitely the best part of the game, and you can tell because the game hypes it up a lot. This is the most interactive part of the game. The trial is where the three games differ the most gameplay-wise, so we'll go over what the three games have in common. A bulk of the trial is non-stop debate where characters talk about their opinions and use truth bullets to point out any contradictions. Note that someone stating false information doesn't necessarily make them the killer. They could have simply just been lacking information that you had. Looking through the arguments makes you think back on the investigation segment, to remember what you saw and heard to progress through the game. So while investigation might seem boring at first, it is important because it helps get through the trial. It makes you feel satisfied when you get the correct answer because you actually remembered something, instead of just googling the answer or watching a YouTube video on it. Also, you don't have to immediately recognize the wrong statement and retort it immediately. The game lets you repeat the argument multiple times before making your move. There is a time limit, but if you choose the correct statement before it runs out, There's no penalty for the amount of times you've had to repeat the discussion. Letting the player repeat the conversation lets them stop and think to process everything instead of forcing them to act immediately, and it makes the player feel satisfied when they progress through a section that they spend a lot of time on. The game allows you to temporarily slow down to aim your shot, but it uses up the concentration meter, and once it's all used up, you have to wait to use it again. So it encourages you to aim better, but also to do so quickly. White noise will also appear in front of the statement, and you have to use a silencer to get rid of it. It also gives you extra time, but shooting a statement with a silencer will remove time. Having this system actually encourages the player to get good with using the silencer. Seeing this thing does a good job at making you feel like you're clearing out irrelevant information and focusing on the important stuff. Occasionally, you'll have to answer a question by selecting one of 3 answers presented to you. This again forces you to pay attention to everything going on. You can't just hold down the button to skip through all the dialogue and do all the gameplay stuff. You have to actually listen to everything being said. Similarly, someone will give you a question that you need to answer, but instead of picking one of 3 options, you pick one of your truth bullets. These ones focus more on remembering the investigation, similar to non-stop debate, while the other ones mainly focus on conclusions that students are coming up with themselves. Also, these trials are fully voice acted, which helps add to the illusion that you're actually in the room with all these characters. And the funny interactions between the characters makes it actually feel like they're talking to each other, and this isn't just voice clips spliced together. Sometimes you'll have to figure out an important word or important words to help figure out the murder. So we want to play a minigame called Hangman's Gambit, where you have to pick letters in order to form a word. All 3 games have different versions of this, but overall, it's a great idea to have the player thinking about something related to the murder, whether it be a weapon, location, or a hole in the killer's plan. Once you've gathered enough evidence, you'll have to select someone. Most of the time it's a killer, but it's not always the case. Sometimes it'll be a red herring where the person you pick is considered correct, but later they state why they can't be the killer and you have to pick someone else later. So just because you see me selecting someone on screen right now doesn't mean they're actually the killer, so no spoilers there. Near the end of the trial, someone will just refuse to listen to you, and they'll ask a question that I think you can't answer, so then you face them off in the rhythm game. Again, the person you fight in the rhythm game isn't always going to be the killer. It could just be like their friend or something, so even though you see me fighting this guy, that doesn't necessarily mean he's the killer, so again, no spoilers there. If you perform well, the tempo will go up, which makes it more difficult but also allows you to attack faster, making the player feel rewarded for being able to put up with the more difficult speed. The player has an ability that will help them time the rhythm, but it is limited, so the player has to determine when to use it. The opponent can also take away your ability to see when you're supposed to time everything, which encourages the player to actually get used to the rhythm, not just use the markers on screen. You can time your ability to cancel out their ability, and the opponent uses their ability multiple times, so the player has to strategize when to use it. At the end, they'll ask you the question again, and you'll come with a solution to solve their quote-unquote unsolvable question, and end the rhythm game. They usually only give you a few seconds to answer this, so you have to act fast. This also encourages you to actually remember the question. I'd say this fits pretty well in the detective experience as well. They don't have all the time in the world, they gotta act quickly. After beating the rhythm game, the person will still refuse to listen to you, and you enter my personal favorite minigame. Closing argument. You recreate the sequence of events in the style of a comic book. Some panels are missing, so you have to use what you know to fill in the blank with a selectable panel. This makes the player recall everything that's happened in the chapter in order to solve the whole case. Sometimes you have to remember stuff from previous trials. Forcing a player actually memorize stuff instead of just forgetting it after they finish one non-stop debate actually makes the whole thing more memorable, and as a result, creates a more memorable story since memorizing stuff is how you progress through the game. Once you finish it, the other classmates correctly vote for the killer alongside you, and as a punishment for not getting away with murder, the killer is executed by Monokuma. You get a score at the end, and more coins you get a better score, so it encourages replayability by making you want to get a better score and get more coins to spend. You have a health system throughout the entire game, which is referred to as the influence gauge, and it goes down when you make an incorrect move, so you can't just shoot answers willy-nilly, you have to actually carefully make the correct choice so you don't lose. So that's the gist of it. But there are so many more twists and turns through the story in all 3 games, which I would love to talk about, but I won't so you can experience it for yourself. Yeah, I did spoil the first chapter for Danganronpa 1 and 2, The weapons in those chapters are lightweight compared to the later chapters, so the game is still worth playing even though you already know what happens in chapter 1. Now that we've gone over the gameplay of Danganronpa Trials overall, let's look closer into each specific game to see what they do differently to further immerse you in your detective experience. We'll start with the first game, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. During the non-stop debate, you can take a statement made by one classmate and use it to dispute another classmate's. This makes the player pay closer attention to all of the statements and not just one that you think is wrong. The version of Hangman's Gambit in this game asks a question and has you click on the correct letter a bunch of times. It's the easiest out of all 3 versions. There will be some letters given to you to help nudge you in the right direction, which is good because the player might not know where to start. They also let you fast forward through this so you aren't wasting too much time to wait for the letter you need, which is good to help keep the game from dragging on. The rhythm game in this version is Bullet Time Battle. It has you shooting bullets at your opponent's statements before they explode and hurt you. You have a limited amount of bullets and you have to reload. Reloading also has to be done with the timing to the rhythm, so you have something important to do while no statements are on screen, so there's no downtime or anything. Reloading is assigned to a different button, so having to press a different button just to reload makes it feel more like actually reloading since it's an inconvenience. Fever Time lets you fire bullets without being able to miss, which is nice, but again, it is limited, so you can't use it whenever. You have to choose the best time to use it. The ending has you choosing a truth bullet to dispute their statement, and it's probably my favorite ending of all 3 rhythm games since it's the hardest to solve. Closing argument in this game is probably the most strict out of the 3 versions. You have no hint or anything. You have to make the correct choices in order from memory. I guess it does add to the experience that you have to remember the whole scenario, not just guess based off the hint like you can with the other 2 games. You're also fake panels, so you can't just use process elimination for the last few. Now there's Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair. They add new segments where a character will say something correct and you use a truth bullet to back them up. It's great because they can show up in the same conversation as the disagree sections, but only one is correct, so the player has to not only think about the weak spots, but also whether or not it's supposed to be agreed with or proven wrong. White noise also sometimes takes multiple shots of silence, which might have you accidentally silencing actual statements if you mash the button, so it encourages you to not mash and actually calculate your moves. Occasionally spot selection will show up where you have to select a suspicious spot. The answer can be pretty surprising, so you have to actually pay attention to all the smaller details here. There's also a new type of debate, Rebuttal Showdown. A character will disagree with what you just said and have points of their own. You need to use your truth blade to convince everyone that you're correct so that your side of the screen gets bigger. Otherwise, you'll be convinced that your opponent is correct and their side of the screen gets bigger. The text will be positioned differently, so you have to actually look at the text carefully and plan accordingly. There are 2 parts of the argument. Taking up enough of the screen lets you move on, while if the opponent takes up too much of the screen, you'll lose health, and if you're on the second part of the argument, you'll go back to the first part. But slicing them isn't enough. To end the debate, you'll have to use the correct truth blade to cut through the correct argument. Similar to non-stop debate, except you don't really have to aim. The design philosophy behind this is similar to non-stop debate, but there's more of a penalty if you lose this time, so you want to make sure you're correct. I like it, though I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of going back to the previous section if I lose. I'd rather just lose more health. Going back is just tedious. Rebuttal Showdown fits the narrative pretty nicely. The characters aren't just gonna listen to you willy-nilly because you're the protagonist. Someone's gotta disagree with you. Then there's Logic Dive. The character pretty much stays still for the rest of the trial, so it's cool being able to actually move around. You move through this course while avoiding obstacles and falling off. A question will pop up and you have to travel on the path that corresponds to the correct answer. It's probably one of the minigames that feels most like a traditional game, so it's cool having this, so you have to actually get used to moving around and dodging obstacles and getting good at the game, instead of just googling the answer and going on the path with the correct answer. Then we have the minigame Improved Hangman's Gambit. Yes, the game actually names it Improved. But some people would actually say it's worse than the original, and I can see why. They don't give you any letters this time, so it might feel like you're just picking stuff out at random. And it can be kind of difficult, but I actually really like it. Instead of just picking out the letters you want, you have to pick 2 of the same and match them together to fill it in the word. If you match 2 different letters, it'll explode, and you'll lose health. The letters will be floating across the screen, and if 2 different ones touch, they'll also explode. But if 2 of the same touch, they'll merge together, and you can use them if you need it. You can still fast forward here, but it's not the best idea since two different ones might bump together and explode. I like the new version since you have to actually pay attention to what happens across the whole screen and not just pick out what you want. Panic Talk action is the replacement for a bullet time battle and it functions the same, but the end is a little different. Basically, you put 4 words in order together quickly. I don't like it as much because it's way too easy. Maybe they did this because the old version was too similar to Non-Stop Debate. It's an okay substitute, but I'd rather them bring back the truth bullets. Now there's closing argument. Instead of filling in the gaps from start to finish, you were given a few panels and not all of them. Some are real, some are fake. You have to put the real ones in the correct spot, and once you do, the fake panel will be destroyed and you'll get more until you finish the whole thing. The empty spots and the panels give you hints, so those help you figure them out. And there are some parts that are better and worse than the first game's version. The first game giving you all the panels makes it feel more like you're actually piecing everything together from start to finish, which I preferred compared to 2 where it kind of feels like you're filling in missing puzzle pieces. But 1 also has this problem where it can be hard to understand what's happening in the panels. Sometimes what you interpret is what's different from actually happening, or sometimes 2 panels will look the same and you have to kind of guess between them. And when it is small, it's kind of hard to see. 2 giving you hints helps you avoid confusion, which is nice. So both have their pros and cons. Finally, we have Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. So V3's non-stop debates remove the ability to take other statements, which is a shame, but in its place is the ability to lie. Yeah, so sometimes Kaede likes her friends a little too much and decides to lie to protect them. I think it's a cool addition as it gives you an extra thing to think about, and you basically have double options since you can lie with any truth bullet. You have to hold down the button to turn the truth bullet into a lie bullet, and if you miss, you will lose health. So it punishes you for performing poorly. Some parts require you to lie, but others instead activate back routes, which gives you new dialogue which you can't get when you tell the truth. Having 2 solutions to debates encourages replayability so the players can see the different dialogue depending on which option they choose. When you use the focus mechanic, you can see a red dot called a V point. Hitting it improves your score at the end and gives you more coins, so it encourages you to aim well. There's also a harder version of non-stop debate called Mass Panic Debate, where 3 people will speak out once, but there'll only be 1 correct solution. Occasionally, a character will be too loud and silence the entire room, including the other 2. So you have to silence their statement, similar to white noise. Often, the solution will be silenced, so the game does this to make sure you're actually getting good at multitasking. Spot selection is back, but this time they made the picture smaller, so it's harder to see the smaller details, which is a shame. Now we have Hangman's Gambit 3.0. The letters are obscured, and you have to use a light to reveal them. But your light has a limit, and once it's used up, the letters are obscured again. So the player is encouraged to strategize when to use the light to reveal as many letters as possible, and also encourages the player to memorize them. Once again, making sure the player focuses on the unimportant letters just as much as the important ones. The detective experience is enhanced here since you have to find letters you need, similar to how a detective would find clues they need. Rebuttal Showdown is back, but this time instead of waiting for them to get near the center, you can just start cutting through statements immediately since your blade goes through the screen. There's a little of strategy since you worry less about timing, but it's better paced since you don't have to wait as much. Psych Taxi is basically the replacement for Logic Dive. You avoid obstacles on the road and have to choose the correct choice to progress. The difference here is that you collect letter boxes to form question, so the player has to focus on the question and the road. Adding this helps the experience. The player has to find out the question they need to answer before answering it. There's also no jumping, so you have to maneuver through everything, making it harder. Mind has you getting rid of colored blocks to reveal pictures. One of the pictures is the solution you need to answer the question. The colors change in a consistent pattern. Any blocks of the same color next to each other will break together, and single blocks give you a time penalty when you break them. So overall, it forces you to plan out where you're going to break, similar to something like Picross. Breaking blocks to find an image is similar to digging through trash to find a disposed piece of evidence. Debate scrum happens when the class can't agree on an opinion. You will be on one team and your teammates will have blades that have keywords on it. Your opponents will have statements that contain the keywords and you have to match them correctly to prove them wrong. My only complaint is that sometimes the statements contain multiple keywords, so it's hard to figure out which one you're supposed to choose. The keyword is not highlighted unless you've already counted it, so you have to pay attention to the whole statement and pay attention to your keywords. It makes you feel like a detective looking for smaller details that prove something wrong. After countering all the statements, you mash buttons to prove that you're right. Button mashing here feels kinda intense, so when you succeed, it makes you feel like you've actually successfully convinced everyone. Argument Armament, it's a new rhythm game. You have to press the right button at the right moment, compared to previous rhythm games where you mainly just press one button to lock onto a statement, another to shoot, and another reload. There's no reloading here, so there's less strategy with timing. Favor time in this game just lets you press any button you want, which isn't as helpful as not letting you miss. The end here is the same as 2, which isn't as good as 1. Overall, this is probably the worst rhythm game, but it's still pretty good. And here's a new version of Closing Argument. You start out with a few panels and gain more over time when you get more answers correct. Kinda similar to the second game. However, there's no fake panel, which kinda sucks because it's easier and the fake panels did help add to the detective experience. The hints are back, so it's a little better than 1, but still not better than 2. And there's a new addition at the end. You have to actually press a button to vote for someone. At this point, you already know who the killer is, and there's no reason to vote for anyone besides the killer. But it's still a nice touch, and it probably makes it hurt even more when you're voting for someone that you like. And that is Danganronpa. It's a great amount of fun playing these games. The story is filled with lovable and not so lovable characters, and the lore is unmatched. And the gameplay complements it greatly. Again, even if I did spoil the first chapter of the first 2 games, they're still worth playing with all the twists and turns that happen in the later chapters. The general consensus is that 2 is the best while 3 is the worst, but honestly, they're all so great that I recommend playing them all in order. The games are all connected, and playing a later game will spoil the previous game, so you should play them all in order. There's also Danganronpa Another Episode, Ultra Despair Girls, which I didn't talk about in the video since it's so different. It's a shooter, not really a detective game, but it follows the same story and adds to the lore. It came out after Danganronpa 2 and takes place between the first 2 games. I'd recommend it too if you want to enjoy the story. There's also a bunch of manga and anime, which is cool since they add to the lore. But that's what they mainly focus on. They don't really give you the immersive detective experience as the mainline games do. These mainline Danganronpa games are what turn a video game into making a player feel like a detective. Play the Danganronpa games. Many digital stores allow you to buy the games in a bundle for cheaper, and they go on sale all the time. One time the first game went on sale for Switch eShop for like $3. No matter how you play, you can't go wrong with Danganronpa. And this concludes my video on how Danganronpa uses game design to create an immersive detective experience. Hey, thanks for watching that video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also check out my Twitter, Twitch, Reddit, Discord, and Instagram. Also don't forget to check out my channel 3 Peeps, a channel I host alongside 7xBruv and JVortex. We're on Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, Reddit, Discord, and Instagram. Thank you.